Morning everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I'm Sean Butler, Bugsy Loans up in front. It's a very bright Monday morning. Well, at least bright in the meteorological sense. It's not so bright when you look at Twitter this morning and you find out that the Pedro Porro deal is off or it's hanging by a thread, best case. Oh dear, we're going to try and pick the bones out of it for you guys. Just do me a favour if you wouldn't mind, guys, please like the video, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, hit the notification bell as well, and drop a comment. Let me know everything you'd like to get off your chest about this one. Who do you blame if it doesn't happen? Where do we go? What's the next step? I don't know, it's all very frustrating, but here's the story, guys. So we wake up this morning and David Ornstein, who's a generally very reliable journalist, he says the deal is off, that Sporting have reneged on the deal. They moved the goalpost last minute on the contracts that were arranged. Daniel Levy is furious. Pedro Porro is heartbroken and devastated. He'd already said goodbye. After the Sporting Porto League Cup final that happened on Saturday night, it was all done. We even had a here we go from Fabrizio Romano, but for a lot of people there was always this lingering doubt around why it was taking so long. And perhaps the fears have materialised into something that is catastrophic for Tottenham's second half of the season. Unless they pivot, resolve this, or find something else very quickly, then it could all look very bleak very quick. But here's, as far as I understand it, here's where we got to, right? So around the 20th of January, the deal, the negotiations start. But from what I've read, that there was attempts to try and begin those negotiations several days before then, but the Sporting were not responding. And there might just be a reason why that is. And it all comes down to the release clause. So a lot of people, a lot of fans are screaming out, just pay the bloody release clause, just pay the 45 million euros, just get it done, stop allowing Sporting to play hardball, to negotiate. Now, for the longest time, the reason why I believed and I thought that they weren't going to do that was because of cash flow. Because if you just trigger the release clause, then you have to pay it up front, and that can be quite disruptive, or very disruptive, very dilutive to your ability to continue with your operational expenses. But what's actually come out in the last couple of days is that the release clause was never actually even a thing that could have been triggered, because it wasn't relevant. It wasn't something that was allowed to be triggered for one of two reasons, and I've heard both of these reasons being touted by respectable journalists, so I don't know which one of them is true. Both of them can't be true. Only one of them can be true, but in either event, it means that there was no release clause to trigger. Some people are saying that because Pedro Porro was in his first year of his contract with Sporting, that the release clause was only triggerable, if that's a word, after the first 12 months. And that there was that buy clause in the contract that said that. Yes, there's a £45 million release clause, but only that only can be activated after the first season. So if that's the case, then it's irrelevant. The release clause wasn't something that could have been activated, and the 45 million euros was really just a baseline negotiation number that everyone was working around. Other people are saying that that wasn't the case, that there was a period in this window where you could have activated it, but it was a very sneaky clause within the contract that said it could only be triggered within the first 18 or 19 days of the window, and that in the final 12 days of the window you couldn't activate that release clause. And maybe that is why Sporting were reluctant to negotiate before that period, and that only once it came into that 12-day period, that final 12 days, did they answer the phone, did they respond to faxes or communications or whatever. And knowing full well that they knew that they wouldn't have to sell him at any price, but maybe Tottenham did or maybe Tottenham didn't. Now, if the latter, if that second option is the case, then I think you have to, first of all, take your hat off to the sneaky negotiation skills of the Sporting chairman. Paul O'Keefe has already said in a tweet this morning that he knew that the Sporting chairman was a nightmare to work with, but he's taking it to new levels of nightmarish behaviour. So you might be able to say with confidence that he's the Portuguese Daniel Levy and that Daniel Levy has been levied. But in any event, there is somebody on Tottenham's side or the agent of Pedro Porro that has screwed up, because Pedro Porro's agent should be fully abreast of every little minor detail within his contract. And so if he didn't bring that to Tottenham's attention in time, then he's at fault. But at the same time, you can make the argument that Tottenham should have been asking those questions to Pedro Porro's agent. Is there anything in the contract that is going to, that's going to come up at the last minute that's going to stop us being able to trigger that release clause if we have to? And not knowing that there's that 12-day get out of jail free card on the release clause probably changed the negotiation style of Daniel Levy. He probably thought he could hardball, be a little bit less immediate, a little bit less determined to negotiate to find a middle ground, knowing full well that if Sporting chairman was just stubborn, then the last minute he could have just gone, okay, here's your 45 million, get it done. Now, I don't know, I'm speculating about which one of those two is the more likely. To be honest, I would have thought the first one sounds more likely, that in the first year the release clause can't be triggered. It seems very specific if the latter clause was the reason. In any event, the release clause couldn't be activated, and so it was always just a negotiation. And that Sporting wanted 45 million. The release clause was 45 million euros, but in the end, Tottenham agreed to pay 48 million euros, as far as I'm aware, with a structured deal over the length of the contract. Now, when people say that you pay off the contract, pay off the fee over the course of the contract, whilst on your own accounts you can amortize it at a steady rate. So if it was 50 million over 5 years, for example, you would write down 10 million a year on amortization. But the payment structure doesn't have to be 10 million a year to Sporting. It could be 30 up front and then 20 over the next 5 years. It could be anything, any particular variation. And allegedly, what I'm hearing today, what I've seen this morning, is that Tottenham agreed to pay 48 million euros to get it done, and there was some structuring of the payments. But the reason why the Sporting chairman has moved the goalposts at the last moment is because there was a miscommunication, or something happened where Daniel Levy sent over a terms of trade that had a different number that was supposed to come over for the first instalment than what the Sporting chairman was expecting. Now, whether that was miscommunication or whether the Sporting chairman has just changed his mind and using that as an excuse, I don't know. But as it is, we are where we are, and that is that Sporting and Pedro Porro have not necessarily come to an accord with Tottenham. He isn't on a plane. I think he's missed 3 or 4 different planes apparently to be here for his medical. Time is running out. There's 36 hours. And it leaves you to wonder, what do we do in a world where Sporting just have changed their mind and don't want to let him go because maybe they think that the £45 million that they're going to get, they're not going to be able to do much with it in this window, and so the cost of him being absent from the team for the next 6 months may cost them a place in the Champions League, and that might end up costing them more money than what the money coming in for Porro is. Who knows? Don't know the reasons why they're reneging, but they are. Whose fault is it? Well, I think on this one, for me personally, whilst there was due diligence that may not have been done appropriately, you could make that argument that Daniel Levy has been a typical late, you know, the kind of the idea of early bird catches the worm, the opposite of that, you know, patience is a virtue, doesn't really stand true sometimes with Daniel Levy. Pushes things too late, holds back too frequently, and leaves us with very little time to pivot. I still do think there are ways we could pivot. Inter Milan are desperate for money, apparently. Their transfer budget is zero. They're desperately trying to offload money, or offload players for money. Tottenham could perhaps go and pivot and buy DUMFRIES, and maybe even Stefan de Vrij. Maybe do a double deal with them, with the money saved. It's not my first choice. You know how I feel about DUMFRIES. I don't think he's very good. I think he's a slightly more athletic version of Emerson Royale, but I'm devastated if Pedro Porro doesn't come off. I still hold hope that we'll figure it out in the end, but as I said at the start, I feel like Daniel Levy and whoever this sporting chairman, whatever this guy's name is, it's like the immovable object meets the unstoppable force, or whatever the phrase is, you know. Two very stubborn minds that just don't want to give in. This kind of zero-sum game mindset of believing that in any negotiation someone has to lose, and therefore no one wants to give an inch. It's such an archaic, outdated method of business, but hey, it is what it is. It is what it is. You know, I don't know what you need to do to get it over the line with Pedro Porro, but you need to make a decision quick, whether you just pay the additional money, and then if the chairman still pulls the plug a second time, then you have to pivot and pull away. Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe you come back with one last thing and say you have 2 hours to make your mind up. Here's 50 million. Here's the structure of the terms. This is it. Put up or shut up. If you're going to say, if I don't hear from you in 2 hours, then we're going to go our separate ways. I think you have to I don't think you can necessarily spend too much more time. You know, it's the 11th hour, isn't it? As always. It's a very frustrating affair, guys. I don't know what to say. I'll keep you updated. But yeah, for right now, it looks like Pedro Porro is hanging in the balance. I don't think this one is particularly on Daniel Levy. Let me know what your thoughts are. Like, share and subscribe. And as always, guys, bye-bye.